Okay, so the first subtopic is the beginning of conflict. And we're just going to kind of set the stage to tell you how we go from non-loss of life for the most part, other than the Boston Massacre, to starting to actually engage in battles. So the beginning of conflict. Now, a fellow of note to remember was a guy by the name of John Howe, who's on your ID sheet, John Howe. And he was a private in the Royal Army of King George III. But he was in America serving as a spy for the British. Okay? Now, I'll give you an example. Like when there was the war in Vietnam, it was the North Vietnamese versus the South Vietnamese. Now, don't take this the wrong way, but would there be an easy way to distinguish between who was on which side? No. You would, right? Then you'd say, okay, we're gonna have, you know, if nobody knew you guys, and we split this room in half and put Casey over here, and it was this side against this side. I mean, if somebody came in, would they be able to tell very easily who was on which side by looking at you? Shouldn't, right? Same thing in the Vietnam War, because they were both Vietnamese people, so you couldn't tell, other than they wore a uniform. Well, it's no different. Could you tell if somebody that lived in Britain that was a spy in America from maybe the colonists very easily? No. And so John Howe, you know, was mistaken by the colonists as one of their own. But he had been stationed in Boston to fit in and report any happenings back to the King of England. He was a spy. His name is John Howe. So, again, Howe was a private in the army of King George III. He was serving as a spy in America. He was mistaken by the colonists as one of their own. He had been stationed in Boston long enough to fit in. And who is he reporting to directly? Think now, this is an AP course. Who do you think he's reporting to directly? Think about what we've talked about in Massachusetts, in Boston. Is he calling the king on the phone and telling him what's going on? Who's he reporting to? Very good. Thomas Gage. General Gage, who's now the what of Massachusetts? Governor. So, British General Thomas Gage was the man he was reporting to. And Gage had heard rumors that some New Englanders were collecting arms and ammunition. Now, would that be something the British government would want? Colonists gathering up in arms and ammunition? No. So Gage kind of heard through the grapevine that some of these New Englanders, people that lived in New England, which would be Massachusetts and Connecticut and Maine, etc., that these New Englanders were collecting arms and ammunition. There's only one thing they're going to do with those, right? And that's rebel. So what Gage did is he sent John Howe out to see if this indeed was true. Were these New Englanders collecting arms and ammunition? So Howe was sent out by Gage to spy, although they didn't know he was a spy, obviously, to see if these rumors were true, that these colonists were collecting arms and ammunition. Well, Howe snuck around like he did when you're a spy, and he discovered where gunpowder and rifles were being stored, and he also picked up the real key that the colonists were ready to bear arms. Yes? Thank you. Yeah. So the colonists were bearing arms. He realized that they were ready to fight. Well, how did he get his information? Well, Howe stopped by a farmhouse in Lexington. Stopped by a farmhouse. And there was an elderly gentleman there who was cleaning his gun. Okay? So Howe's out trying to get this information to get back to Gage, and he stops by a farmhouse outside of Lexington, and he meets up with an elderly gentleman who's cleaning his gun. And Howe asked the man what he was intending to shoot, thinking he'd give him the answer of probably this or this. What would it be? What's he going to shoot with his gun he's cleaning? Animals, or in this man's reply was a flock of redcoats at Boston. That was his answer. So when Howe asked him, he was expecting probably to say he was going to go hunting. But this elderly gentleman said that he was intending to shoot, quote, a flock of redcoats at Boston. And I'll tell you, as Howe went on around these areas of Lexington, he heard the same type of stories everywhere. He could see rebellious colonists taking up arms. And what did the British call these rebellious colonists that called themselves patriots? Rebels. The British called it rebels. So rebels isn't a coined phrase only for the Civil War. It started back as the name the British gave these colonists who were rebelling at the time, rebels. Now, during the time he observed as a spy, Private Howe witnessed the following three things of importance. So during his observations as a spy, Private Howe witnessed the following. He saw lists that were posted on posts that bared the name of people who remained loyal to the king. So he's walking around wondering if we're going to have some sort of a rebellion here, and he's seeing on these posts, nailed to the post, a list of people. These people are still loyal to the King of England. A list of people. What would that make you think if they're putting up names? They're ready to take care of those names. Not only did he see lists that were posted bearing the names of people who remained loyal to the king, he witnessed firsthand the tar and feathering of loyalists. He watched it as he was spying. He watched this going on. And he even witnessed that some of the loyalists' houses were being burned down because they supported the British point of view. Okay? So he even witnesses homes of loyalists that are being burned down because they defended the British point of view. Well, when Howe goes back to General Gage and says, hey, I know they're stockpiling arms and ammunition in Lexington. This old man told me he's getting ready to shoot a bunch of redcoats. I'm walking through the towns and seeing lists that are bearing names of people loyal to the king. I've watched tar and feathering of loyalists, and I've even seen the burning down of homes of loyalists who remain loyal to the British point of view. What do you think General Gage's response to that was? We're going to seize their arms. He decided to seize these colonial supplies of ammunition and weapons. And they were located at Concord. They had been stockpiling these weapons and ammunition and storing them at Concord. So he goes through Lexington and talks to the old man who gives him the vision of what's happening. He goes into Lexington and sees all these things happening, and he finds out that all these weapons and gunpowder are being stored at Concord. So you got two towns, Lexington and Concord. Now, not only is General Gage going to seize these colonial supplies of ammunition and weapons, he's also going to try to capture two men of importance. One we've already talked about that's a little bit of a rabble-rouser, and that was Samuel Adams. So the general was intending to capture Samuel Adams and John Hancock, who were very important leaders in the colonial legislature. Where? In which colony? Massachusetts. So not only is Gage going to seize those supplies of ammunition and weapons and gunpowder, his intention is to capture both Samuel Adams, who we've already talked about, and John Hancock, who's most known for the largest signature on the upcoming Declaration of Independence, which we're going to be talking about. Both Adams and Hancock were hiding in Lexington at the time. And it was Gage's mission to find them and arrest them for being subversive. That was his plan, along with seizing those supplies and ammunition and weapons and gunpowder at Concord. So, on April 18th, 1775, April 18th, 1775, under the cover of darkness, 700 British troops left their quarters in Boston, marching toward first Lexington, then Concord. So on April 18, 1775, under the cover of darkness, which means it was at night, 700 British troops left their quarters in Boston, marching toward first Lexington and Concord. That takes us to our next subtopic then, which is on to Concord. That's a great story I'm going to tell you. What's that?
There's so many guards. There's no guards.
Well, as the British soldiers marched from Boston toward Concord, they came through the town of Menatomi. Came through a little town called Menatomi. So as the 700 British soldiers under the cover of darkness are marching toward Concord, they came through the town of Menatomi. Well, as they passed through town, they marched right past the house of a retired 78-year-old Samuel Whittemore. So as they marched through Menatomi, they marched right past the home of a retired 78-year-old Samuel Whittemore. He was a retired soldier. He was 78 years old. So, whose army did he fight in? If he's 78 and retired? British, the King's Army. Okay? He had served 5 decades as a soldier. 50 years, folks, as a soldier in the British Army. He fought in several colonial wars, including the French and Indian War. 5 decades as a British soldier. And he's living outside Menatomi, and these redcoats marched right by his home on the way to Concord. Now, Whittemore, you would think, would be a loyalist, would you not? He was the opposite. He hated Britain's heavy-handed tactics and hated their military presence in Massachusetts. He despised it. Even though he served for 5 decades, the point I'm making, in the British Army, he did not agree with the way the British were handling the colonies. He did not like what he considered their heavy-handed tactics. What's that mean? If I'm heavy-handed with you guys, what am I going to do? Right? Forceful. You know, you're going to do this over, what am I going to do? Don't do it, this and that. Okay? He hated that. And he hated this military presence, the 8,000 plus troops in Boston. He hated it. Okay? We'll come back to him. Well, back in Boston, where the soldiers are coming from, correct? Dr. Joseph Warren, remember him? The founding father we never knew? He had organized the Massachusetts Militia back in Boston. He had organized it prior to this, the Massachusetts Militia. What is a militia? Is it an army? Is it an established, organized army? No, a militia is a group of fighting men that fight under someone they're loyal to. In this case, Joseph Warren, but they're not part of any army. Okay? They're not military. Do we really have an army, the colonists? No, everything they have at this point is militia. Okay? Now, not only did Warren organize the Massachusetts Militia, but he also implemented a great spy network to check on British movements. He had spies all over Boston and the surrounding area checking on the British troop movements. Well, he had Patriot spies located on the west bank of the Charles River, which was the river that was kind of separating Boston from Lexington and Concord. You have a map there, I think. I don't know how to look at your map. You see the Charles River on your map, right? You might pull this out because we're going to be talking about this in a minute. Okay? Well, when these spies that were located on the west bank of the Charles River sighted British troops across the river, what did they do? They reacted. And anybody know how they reacted? How do you know your elementary history? What? Not yet. Not yet. You're going to get to him, but Paul Revere had to know what was going on. How did he know that they were crossing the river? They were in the river area. What happened? What did those two guys do that were stationed on the bank of the river? They flickered 2 lanterns in the window of the Old North Church. And when they flickered those 2 lanterns in the window of the Old North Church in Boston, that signal meant that the redcoats were marching toward Lexington. Okay? Now what's first, Lexington or Concord? Lexington. But where are they marching to? Concord. And what are they marching to Concord for? To seize the ammunition, weapons, and such. But they got to come through Lexington. So, these spies that Joseph Warren had on the west bank of the Charles River see these British redcoats coming across the river. They flicker 2 lanterns in the window of the Old North Church in Boston, which meant that the redcoats were marching toward Lexington. Well, shortly after that, Dr. Warren sent out Paul Revere and William Dawes Jr. to ride out into the night, and they are to give the news of the redcoats marching towards Lexington on their way to Concord. So again, the signal meant that the redcoats were marching to Lexington. Shortly after that signal was given, Dr. Joseph Warren sends out Paul Revere and William Dawes Jr. to ride out into the night, and they're to give the news of the redcoats marching towards Lexington on their way to Concord. And they leaped on their horses and galloped off into the night, shouting what? The regulars are coming. The regulars are coming. They did not say redcoats or British. They said the regulars are coming. The regulars are coming. Now, think about if you're Revere and Dawes. How do they ensure that at least one of them is going to get to Lexington? Because are they going to face a little resistance, do you think, getting this message out? How do they ensure they're going to reach Lexington? Look at your map and tell me. How are they going to ensure that?
They went different routes.
What?
They went different routes.
They went opposite directions. Very good, Emily. So Revere and Dawes went in opposite directions to ensure one of them would reach Lexington. Okay, as those 2 dudes are riding towards Lexington, in Lexington, a young doctor by the name of Samuel Prescott is visiting his fiancée. Okay, as Revere and Dawes are riding towards Lexington in different directions, in Lexington, a young doctor by the name of Samuel Prescott is visiting his fiancée. Well, at 1 o'clock in the morning, he bids her goodbye and leaves her residence in Lexington at 1 in the morning. Well, Prescott, as he leaves his fiancées at 1 in the morning, runs into Revere and Dawes, who had both delivered the news to the people of Lexington, and they were then going to deliver the news to the people of Concord. Okay? And Prescott runs into these guys, and they're planning on now traveling to Concord to deliver the news there. Well, Prescott joins the 2, and immediately all 3 gallop into trouble. Immediately. Okay? So as they're in Lexington, already spread the news about the regulars are coming, the regulars are coming. Prescott joins them after leaving his fiancée's house at 1 in the morning, and they run into trouble. Well, Revere's captured by the British soldiers. How many people knew that Paul Revere was actually captured? Okay? Yeah, he was captured by the British soldiers, and Dawes and Prescott barely escaped. And what do they got to do, Macklin? They got to get where? Concord. They got to get there and give them the news. Well, shortly after Dawes and Prescott barely escape, Dawes is thrown from his horse and is forced to walk back home. So who is going to deliver the news to the people of Concord? Dr. Prescott, who wasn't even in the picture when this whole thing started, right? He's the one that actually delivers the news. I think Paul Revere gets way too much credit for his historic ride of courage. Yeah, he did, but he didn't even get to Concord. He got captured. A lot of people don't know that. And we'll talk about a poem that was written that's really inaccurate concerning this, okay? All right, well, that'll take us to the battles at Lexington and Concord. So, where's the first resistance going to be met? Where are the British going to meet their first resistance? At Concord, where all the ammunition, supplies, and gunpowder are? No, at Lexington, because they got to go to Lexington first. So, the morning of April 19th, 1775, the morning of April 19th, 1775, those 700 British troops reach a field just outside Lexington. Okay? The morning of April 19th, 1775, those 700 British troops that marched from Boston reach a field just outside of the town of Lexington. There to block their advance towards Concord was John Parker and 77 colonial militia. And they had gathered in that field with the sole purpose of blocking those 700 British soldiers from going to Concord. So, the morning of April 19th, 1775, 700 British soldiers reach a field